Amid the noisy crowds in Washington, D.C., where the shouts and tax debate slogans echo throughout the space, there is an oddly quiet moment. A moment that no one expects, when a young girl, unaware of the past of the man sitting before her, crying, embraces him, changing a life forever. This hug would not only change one person, but it would also change an entire system, a whole country. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to Gentle Heart Stories yet, do so now. Because this story will keep you hooked every second, not just to hear, but to feel. In just 10 seconds, you'll see how a hug can change everything. Hit subscribe and let's begin this emotional journey together. Do you believe that a hug can do what hundreds of speeches can't? Watch the story now, and you'll see that sometimes, the greatest changes in this world begin with the smallest things. Washington, D.C., the capital of the nation, where politics, power, and change unfold every day. But today, it's unlike any other day. Fall has just arrived, and golden leaves fall on the streets, forming soft carpets beneath the feet of passers-by. The Constitution Square, usually calm, is now bustling and tense like never before. Thousands of people, from the young to the old, have gathered here. They stand packed together, surrounded by signs held high, slogans echoing, "We can't bear high taxes anymore. We demand justice." Arms are raised, hastily written signs that show frustration and concern. The scene is powerful, and anyone walking into it would feel the collective strength of those voices. This crowd has more than one reason. They are not just protesting tax hikes, but they are people who feel abandoned, those the government seems to ignore. The atmosphere feels compressed, every slogan heightening the tension. Ava stands amidst this sea of people, feeling the heaviness in the air, and her worries grow more intense. She's not the only one anxious, but her worry feels unique. She knows that if this tax policy passes, the money she earns working at the cafe won't be enough to care for her mother, who is suffering from heart disease and growing weaker. Her mother can't miss her medication, but with taxes this high, Ava doesn't know how she will manage. Looking around, Ava sees nothing but faces full of anger, discontent, and even despair. She feels as if she's stepped into a strange world, where everything is out of control. And in that moment, amid the chaos, Ava can't escape her anxiety, and the unspoken questions keep rising inside her. Ava is a 26-year-old young woman, strong and full of emotions. She's not someone who likes to show off, but what she has gone through in life has made her more resilient than ever. She works at a small cafe on a quiet street, where the locals stop by each morning for a warm cup of coffee. To Ava, it's the only place where she feels safe, the place that sustains her difficult life along with her mother, the woman who raised her. Her mother has heart disease, and it has made life incredibly hard for both of them. Ava is always the one to care for her mother, worrying about sudden pain attacks and the times her mother has to be hospitalized. She knows that her mother cannot live without her medication, but the rising treatment costs and her meager earnings from the cafe will never be enough to cover those expenses. More than ever, Ava feels the rising despair as she looks at the ever-growing medical bills, knowing that the money she makes will never be enough for the most important things in life. Then, when the government decides to raise taxes, Ava can't help but fear what's to come. Higher taxes mean she'll have to work more, but her income won't change, and the things she needs for her mother seem farther out of reach. Ava isn't asking for a tax exemption for herself, but she just wants fairness, for people like her to be able to live with dignity. Amid the protest crowd, Ava stands, holding a small, handwritten sign she prepared earlier. On it is one simple but heavy line: "We don't ask for tax breaks, we just ask for fairness." This slogan isn't a declaration of war or a strong protest, but a call for fairness in a society where Ava feels left behind. She doesn't demand the government lower taxes for everyone. But she hopes that poor people like herself can be treated fairly and live without constantly worrying about money. Ava knows there are many people in this crowd just like her. They aren't asking for special privileges, they just want a normal life, enough money to take care of their families, and no longer have to fear when a new tax notice arrives. Still, Ava remains firm in her beliefs. She's not asking for too much, she just wants fairness. She stands there, holding her sign, heart heavy, eyes fixed ahead, where thousands of people are still chanting. Ava feels like a tiny drop in an endless ocean, but she wants to believe that if she persists long enough, someone will listen. The crowd around her continues chanting, creating a chaotic and powerful sound. Everyone is passionately participating, as if they're fighting for a common ideal. Ava struggles to make her way through the crowd, searching for a quieter space to think. In her unfamiliar surroundings, she unintentionally wanders into a small corner near the steps of a nearby building. There, amid the hustle and bustle of the protest, Ava sees a middle-aged man sitting alone on the steps. He's wearing a simple coat, his face tired and wrinkled, his hands covering his face as if he's trying to hide deep emotions. No one is paying attention to him. Amidst the lively crowd, he's like a ghost, completely detached from what's happening around him. His eyes are red, as if he's been crying, and Ava can't take her eyes off him. Ava feels a strange sensation rise within her. She doesn't know why she stops and stares at him, but in that moment, she senses a pain that mirrors her own. Though she doesn't know who he is, she feels an intense empathy, as though he, too, is carrying something he can't share with anyone. Unable to just stand there, Ava walks closer to the man. Despite the loud cheers around her, she feels a space of silence enveloping him and herself. She doesn't know why she's acting this way, but the desire to comfort someone in pain is impossible to resist. Ava approaches, placing her hand on his shoulder. The coldness from his body sends a shiver down her spine, tightening her chest. No words are exchanged, only the gentle touch, but it seems to snap him out of his inner turmoil. The man slowly raises his head, and when his eyes meet Ava's, she sees exhaustion in them. Not anger or resentment, but an unbearable tiredness. Ava says nothing, but she knows she can feel some of the pain he's carrying inside. And then, Ava does something she didn't plan. She wraps her arms around him. This hug isn't a regular gesture. In the chaos of the protest, amidst the loud shouts, Ava's hug is like a silence in the noise. When she holds him, the whole world around them seems to stop for a moment. He doesn't cry, doesn't speak, but those red eyes begin to soften. Ava feels the gentleness of his body, as if the hug has brought a sense of peace, a change. The crowd keeps chanting, but in that moment, Ava and this man seem to stand outside of time. This hug is not just a gesture of comfort. It carries a powerful message. While others continue to fight with words and slogans, sometimes, a simple action, a hug, can change everything. Ava feels as though she's done something monumental, even though it's just a small hug, but it seems like a signal for this man, and maybe even for herself, to find some hope in this weary world. Ava's hug made Victor Langston, the man she had just embraced, feel like a part of him had been awakened, though he still couldn't fully comprehend what was happening in his mind. To him, the scene before him remained blurry, as though he were living in a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He tried to stand up. But his limbs suddenly became weak, as though his eyes were seeing something deeper than the crowd surrounding him. Victor Langston, the silver-haired man who was often featured on financial magazines as a symbol of success, was no ordinary person in this crowd. He was the CEO of Langston Technologies, one of the largest tech corporations in the world. This company had built him a vast empire, taking him from a poor boy to a famous billionaire. Langston had overcome every hardship in his life, from his days growing up in a poor family where he and his siblings had to beg on the streets, to his decision to change his destiny. He had risen from nothing, starting with an old computer and a dream of technology. But now, everything he had built, was under threat. Just in the past few weeks, he had become the target of public criticism after deciding to reject a tax exemption proposal for his corporation, despite previously promising to support the poor and share his wealth. His decision had made him seem like a heartless person, someone focused only on his own benefits, forgetting human values. The public called him a rich man who didn't know how to share, a symbol of greed and selfishness. Amidst the harsh criticisms from the press and protests like this one, he quietly chose to blend in among the crowd, disguised, to hear directly from the people. Victor never imagined that, in an instant, he would find himself in a situation he had never prepared for. The hurt in his heart was growing deeper, and what he felt now was a sense of disorientation. Ava's hug, which to him was an entirely inexplicable act, was exactly what he needed at this moment. Victor Langston had become a living symbol of the American dream that many aspired to. He was the epitome of someone rising from poverty to achieve extraordinary success. Born in a poor family in a rundown neighborhood in New York City, Victor had endured hardship, with only meager meals and short, hurried naps on the steps of abandoned buildings. When he was young, his family couldn't pay property taxes, and for many years, they lived under the oppression of creditors. During his childhood, Victor had to beg on the streets with his mother and siblings. They suffered the unforgettable shame of not having enough money to buy medicine for their mother or pay for their home. The memories of cold winter nights when they slept outside without blankets, mornings waking up hungry, these memories still haunted him to this day, but regardless, those were the days that fueled Victor's intense desire to change his life. With his perseverance and intellect, he overcame adversity and reached the top. From a poor tech student, he gradually built his own company, and from there, everything changed. Langston Technologies was born, and over time, it became a giant in the tech industry, leading in software development and artificial intelligence. Victor became a billionaire, admired and respected by many. He had built a strong empire and a happy family, but deep down, he never forgot the painful past he came from. However, in recent years, as he faced societal changes and tough decisions in his work, he began to realize that the values he once held dear were now being tested. The tension between Victor and the public reached its peak after he decided to reject the tax exemption proposal for his company. He realized that the decisions he had made throughout his career, from founding the company to investing in large projects, had changed the face of the economy and created significant opportunities for thousands of workers. But not everyone saw it that way. Protests against his policies had become more intense. He was accused of being heartless, a billionaire focused only on self-interest, neglecting his social responsibilities. Victor, filled with worry and unease, decided to attend today's protest, but he didn't want anyone to recognize him. He disguised himself with a hat and sunglasses to avoid detection. He wanted to hear directly what the people truly thought of him, not through the words of journalists or the media. He wanted to confront the truth, to understand whether he had truly lost his way with his policies. When he entered the crowd, Victor could not help but feel the anger and hatred from those around him. The accusations and chants demanding justice made him feel as though he were being pushed out of the society he had helped create. Still, he continued to listen, hoping to find a way to resolve the conflict gnawing at his mind. No one knew who he was, and that was exactly what he wanted. Victor Langston had always lived in deep inner conflict that no one could understand. On one hand, he was a business leader, where every decision had to be based on the interests of shareholders, the company, and the market. Every decision he made had to ensure that the company remained at the top, generating profits and sustaining growth. His shareholders didn't care about emotions or social issues, they only wanted stock growth and stable profits. On the other hand, deep within himself, Victor carried painful memories from his poor childhood, when his family struggled with unpaid taxes, living in poverty. The images he witnessed, the moments spent begging with his mother, were etched into his mind and haunted him throughout his life. He vividly remembered the feeling of hunger, the feeling of abandonment, and he understood that the deprivation he had once experienced was something the poor still endured today. His current life seemed to be standing at a crossroads. One path was to continue protecting the rights of the corporation and its shareholders, and the other was to listen to the voices of the people and do something more meaningful. This internal conflict made him feel disoriented, unsure of which path was the right one. When Ava's hands gently embraced Victor, all he felt was warmth and comfort, something he had never experienced throughout his long life. There were no words, no judgment, just a simple hug, but it was enough to melt a part of his hardened heart. All the noise of the crowd, the chanting, seemed to fade away, no longer important. It was just him and Ava, two people in a moment where time seemed to stop. Victor didn't understand why, but in that hug, he suddenly felt forgiven. He felt like a child, stripped of everything, no longer burdened by heavy decisions. The hug wasn't pity, it was an invisible connection, a wordless understanding. It was the one moment in many years that Victor truly felt accepted, not for being a wealthy CEO, but for being a human being with pain and unfinished things in his life. Victor thought about the days long ago when he was a hungry child, when he had to struggle on his own, when he had nothing but the desire to rise. He thought of the times he had to beg on the streets, thinking of his mother, who sacrificed everything for him to become who he was today. But throughout that journey, he had never experienced a hug like this. A hug not meant to solve problems, not to criticize, but to remind him that, no matter who he was still a human being, and sometimes, we just need a little love and sharing to overcome the burdens. Ava said nothing, but her embrace broke down the walls Victor had built over the years. The wounds from his past, the pain from difficult decisions, seemed to touch him, to be soothed by human kindness. Ava didn't know that her hug had awakened him, but for Victor, that moment was when he knew he needed to change. At the end of the day, when night fell and the crowd began to disperse, the story of the hug between the two, between Ava and Victor, began to spread on social media. Photos taken from afar, short videos capturing that moment, all appeared in timelines, making people stop and take notice. But no matter how widely these images were shared, no one truly knew who they were. The scene, the hug between the young woman and the man in simple clothes, made many stop and think. Some thought it was just a chance moment, a symbol of unity among those fighting for justice. Others saw it as a humane act, showing that no matter how different we are, in the end, we all need a hug to remind us we are human. But none of those watching the videos knew that the man in that scene was Victor Langston, the one of the most powerful tech billionaires, who had just hours earlier rejected a tax exemption proposal for his corporation. If they had known, they might have seen the story differently, but in reality, everyone only saw the hug, and that was what truly mattered. Victor, after leaving the square, felt an odd emptiness. The images of that hug kept repeating in his mind, and he couldn't shake them off. That hug was not just comfort, it was a reminder that he needed to face himself, to confront the decisions he had made in the past. That night, as he sat alone in his room, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew that what he needed most right now was change. And perhaps, starting from a wordless hug, he would find the right path for himself. The image of that hug would continue to spread, becoming the topic of conversations, articles, and social media posts, but only Victor and Ava would truly understand the meaning of that moment. If you feel that this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. At Gentle Heart Stories, we share tales of compassion, change, and valuable life lessons. Be a part of this loving community and help us spread positive messages. The next day, images of the hug between Ava and the man in the square quickly became a phenomenon on social media. Status updates, posts, and videos were shared endlessly, creating a strong wave that no one could ignore. People were buzzing about that special moment, but the strange thing was, no one actually knew the identities of the two people in the picture. The hug, though silent, carried a powerful force, making the entire country reconsider the hot social issues, especially the controversial tax policies. Netizens quickly dubbed Ava the angel of the protest, and this nickname became a part of the story. Many praised her for her courageous act, considering it a symbol of compassion and understanding. However, there were also critics who viewed it as an inappropriate act at such a sensitive time. Public opinion was divided, and Ava, this young girl who never sought the spotlight, was suddenly placed at the center of attention. Journalists began trying to approach her, inviting her for interviews, but Ava just wanted to stay away from it all. She didn't want the spotlight, she didn't want her life to be disrupted. Yet, that hug had created a spark that no one could ignore, and she became the focal point of a major debate. She knew she could not go back to how things were before, but she didn't know what to do next. Meanwhile, reporters, bloggers, and even major newspapers began investigating the man in the picture. They suspected he was a person of power, a celebrity, but no one could say for sure. Thus, the biggest question remained, who was the man? And why did Ava hug him like that? Victor Langston couldn't stop following the news. Although he had been very careful to maintain his privacy, the images and news about the hug between Ava and him kept looping in his mind, like an endless cycle. He couldn't stop, even though he tried to focus on his work and not let himself be distracted. His heart, one that had long become hardened after years of battling in the business world, now felt an unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't fear, but a strange feeling of understanding and connection. Victor couldn't stop thinking about Ava. Who was she? Why was she able to give him a hug without words? Why did his heart seem to melt when he recalled that moment? Even though he had made the decision to reject the tax exemption proposal. And even though he was always logical in every decision, that hug forced him to confront himself, with the choices of the past, with what he had overlooked. He feared that if that hug were exposed to the public, everything would be turned upside down. He would lose the image of a powerful billionaire, a man who always stood firm in tough decisions. But at the same time, he couldn't stop feeling that the hug had opened a door that he couldn't close. And more, he felt the urge to learn more about this girl, Ava. With everything that had happened in the past few days, Ava couldn't go back to the peaceful life she once had. The coffee shop owner where she worked called her into his office, and with anger in his eyes, he announced that she would no longer be employed there. "You're the one who stirred the waves. "You've politicized our coffee shop," the boss said curtly. Ava just quietly accepted it, not wanting to argue or explain. She understood that she had been put in an unavoidable situation. She had become part of a battle she never intended to join. But now, it had taken over her entire life. Leaving the coffee shop, Ava walked out with a heavy heart. Not only had she lost her job, but she also had to face the worry about her mother's health. Her mother, who had always suffered from heart problems, now had more severe pain than ever before. Ava feared that if taxes continued to rise, the money she earned wouldn't be enough to care for her mother, and she didn't know what to do to change this situation. The past days had made Ava reflect deeply on her choices. That hug had made her rethink life, but the difficulties she faced still hadn't lessened. Her mother needed medication, she needed a job to sustain her life, and everything was becoming harder than ever. Ava felt desperate, but deep down, she still held a small hope that things would change. She just didn't know how. On a cold morning, as Ava was preparing for another worrying day, she received a strange letter. The letter had no sender's name, only one sentence: "I am the man from that day. Meet me at the Library of Congress, 4 p.m. tomorrow." At first, Ava thought it was just a prank. Someone might be playing with her about the attention she had received after the hug. But as she looked at the words again, a strange feeling arose inside her. She wondered, could it be him? Could it be the man she had hugged in the square? That hug, though wordless, was deeply etched in her mind. She couldn't pass up this chance, because part of her felt that this was an opportunity to understand him better, and maybe help her find a way forward in life. Despite many doubts, Ava decided to go to the Library of Congress the next day, as the letter requested. She didn't know what she was doing, but she felt compelled to do it, even if it was just to learn more about this mysterious man. She wasn't sure who she would meet, but the questions in her mind remained. Why did he want to meet her? And would this meeting truly change anything? The next day, Ava arrived at the Library of Congress on time. She stood silently in the large reading room, looking around but seeing no one. Everything around her was quiet, with only the soft sound of pages turning. Suddenly, from the shadows at the back of the room, a man stepped forward. No longer the weary man sitting on the steps in the square, but a distinguished gentleman in a sharp black suit. His hair had turned white, but his bright skin and resolute expression made Ava not immediately recognize him. However, when their eyes met, Ava knew right away. This was the man she had hugged in the square. Victor Langston stood there, and in his eyes, Ava felt something very different. When Ava walked into the reading room of the Library of Congress, the atmosphere became tense and heavy. Victor Langston was no longer the man struggling to seek understanding from the crowd. He was a powerful billionaire, standing in a luxurious room with the perfect appearance of a gentleman. But strangely, his gaze was neither arrogant nor self-satisfied. On the contrary, it was a tired, troubled look, as if he were carrying an invisible burden that no one could see. As Ava looked at him, her heart raced, and she couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. At that moment, Victor spoke, his voice deepened, carrying a profound sadness. "You may wonder why I was part of that protest. Let me tell you," he began. Victor recounted his past, the days of poverty when he and his family had to beg on the streets, walking miles to find a meal. He had been an orphan child with no place to turn, and all he had was faith in himself and the American dream. After years of struggle, he rose from nothing, built a tech empire, and became a billionaire that the world had to admire. But deep inside, the obsession never left him, the poverty he had endured. And the pain he had witnessed as a child, however, when he reached the peak, he felt torn between two worlds. On one hand, there was his responsibility to shareholders, and business decisions had to generate profits. On the other hand, he felt increasingly disconnected from the people, those who had once been a part of him. He knew that his decisions sometimes affected their lives, and he could no longer ignore that. That was why he had rejected the proposal to exempt his corporation from taxes. He didn't want to be a symbol of injustice anymore. But that choice made him feel as though he were living in a world with no way out. The sensation of dizziness immediately overwhelmed Ava. She looked at Victor with disbelief, partly because the truth was so unexpected, and partly because she felt betrayed. She hadn't expected that the man she had embraced in the square was the one who could influence the entire tax system and make decisions that changed the lives of millions of people. She felt like she had been tricked into a game she hadn't known about, and that embrace, instead of offering comfort, now felt like an irony. "What are you saying? You're the one behind the system I'm fighting against. You're the one making decisions that make my mother and I struggle with life," Ava said, her voice full of anger. Victor fell silent for a moment, staring into her eyes. "I understand how you feel, Ava. But you don't know that I'm struggling in my own life too. My decisions were never easy, and I can't just change everything because I feel guilty." Gradually, Ava realized that Victor was not a villain. He wasn't someone who only cared about his personal gain while ignoring the suffering of others. In fact, he was also a victim of the system he had built. His entire life had been caught in the whirlpool of profit and power. And now, he had to face the consequences that he couldn't control. Ava felt her heart begin to soften. She understood that he wasn't the only one responsible. Society and this system had also pushed him into a difficult position. Victor looked at Ava intently, his gaze serious as if trying to understand her thoughts. "If you were standing in the middle of Congress, if you could say anything about this tax policy, what would you say?" Ava paused for a moment, thinking carefully before answering. She felt a compulsion to speak her mind. "I wouldn't talk about numbers, I wouldn't talk about tax rates or profits. I'd just talk about my mother. A $300 heart medication, a paper with a tax hike notice. And a woman facing death because she doesn't have enough money for treatment. That's what I'd say," she replied, her voice full of emotion. Victor was silent. Ava's answer hit him straight in the heart. What she said was not about theories or complicated economic arguments, but real stories, real people he had once ignored. This feeling only made him realize that he needed to do something to change. Victor couldn't stay still. He knew that if he kept silent and just quietly observed, nothing would ever change. To truly make a difference, he needed help, and the only person he trusted was Ava. "Ava, I've heard what you said. You understand the struggles that people like you face. And I need you to help me," Victor said, his voice no longer that of a leader, but of someone seeking salvation. "I'm quietly building a campaign for humane tax reform, a campaign that will put people above profit, and I need someone who can convey my story, the story of people like you, who struggle every day just to survive. You will be the spokesperson for this campaign," Victor proposed. Ava looked at Victor, her head spinning. She felt she wasn't strong enough, not capable enough to stand for such a large campaign. "I'm not worthy, I don't have the knowledge, I'm just a coffee girl. How could I stand up and speak about these issues?" she replied, her voice hesitant. Victor didn't show disappointment, he simply smiled gently. "Ava, you don't need to have a Harvard degree or deep knowledge of tax law to understand what fairness is. Fairness is what you've lived, it's what you've witnessed, and your story will touch people's hearts. Ava sat silently, feeling her heart change. She looked at Victor, and in his eyes, she saw a new belief. She understood that life wasn't just about hardship and challenges. But there could also be change, if people acted together. Ava, you can do it. I believe in you, Victor said, his voice filled with sincerity, and then Ava made her decision. Not for money, not for fame, but for that embrace, the one she had given to the man in the square. She felt that embrace wasn't finished, and it needed to spread. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew this was an opportunity for change. When the tax reform campaign called Taxes for Unity was officially announced, public opinion immediately erupted. Posters, promotional videos, and speeches by Ava and Victor were spread across social media platforms. Ava, a woman who had once been just a barista on a street corner, had now become the face of the tax revolution, symbolizing tax justice and social fairness. She was no longer an unknown girl but an inspiration to those who had been oppressed by the tax system. The image of her in a simple shirt, standing with Victor Langston, a man known worldwide as a tech billionaire, caught everyone's attention. The message of this campaign was clear: taxes were not just a burden, but a way for big companies to contribute to the community and help the poor. Ava represented the impoverished, the voiceless, while Victor represented those who could change, who could set an example for society. Taxes are not just numbers, they are tools for us to work together to build a fairer society, Ava stated in a widely circulated video. Her words were like a fresh breeze, reaching the hearts of the poor, those who had long suffered under the tax burden imposed by large companies. Immediately, she became a symbol of hope, but not everyone viewed this campaign positively. Public opinion split into two distinct factions. One group fervently supported the campaign, seeing it as a long overdue stand for the rights of the poor. Though not all of them agreed on the methods or vision of the campaign, they saw hope in Ava and Victor's actions. On the other hand, a group strongly opposed it. They believed the Taxes for Unity campaign was just a trick by the wealthy to maintain a clean image, a way to cover up their commercial schemes. Criticism of Victor was even harsher. They called him a method actor, playing the role of a billionaire concerned for the poor to conceal his true profit-driven motives. They argued that this campaign was nothing more than a staged performance to beautify his image and his company. As for Ava, she was labeled a puppet, someone being used by Victor as a tool for his campaign. These harsh criticisms hurt and unsettled her. But at the same time, there were people who supported her, who recognized that Ava was not a puppet, but a person with her own heart and ideals. She was fighting for what she believed was right, not for money or fame. As the campaign grew and attracted significant attention, the pressure came not only from society but also from within Victor's company. Shareholders of the Langston Group were unhappy with Victor's decision to publicly oppose tax exemptions for large corporations. They saw the tax reform campaign as a threat to both short-term profits and the future development of the company. An emergency meeting was called, and in the boardroom, the shareholders could not hide their anger. "Victor, we cannot continue down this path. You're jeopardizing not only the company's image but our future. If you don't stop, we'll have to take action," one of them threatened. Victor, usually tough, couldn't ignore the simmering anxiety in his heart. These were the people who had nurtured the company for years, and their disappointment could have serious consequences. But he couldn't stop now, as he had chosen this path, and despite the opposition, he would not turn back. Just when the situation reached its peak of tension, Ava was invited to testify in a special hearing at the Congress. It was a unique opportunity for her to present her views and story to the most powerful people. She knew this was not a competition of rhetoric, but a chance to stand up and speak about the injustice she and other poor people had to endure. When it was her turn, Ava stepped up to the podium, her eyes meeting those of the senators and guests. She took a deep breath and began speaking. "I'm not a tax expert, I don't have a degree in economics. I'm just a girl who saw my mother give up smoking because we couldn't afford it, and I'm the one who hugged a wealthy man, not because of greed, but because he cried." What does that hug mean? It means we must look at each other not as the strong and the weak, but as fellow human beings, Ava said, her voice deep and full of emotion. Her story touched the hearts of everyone in the room. She didn't just talk about tax figures, she spoke about the real lives of the poor, those living in deprivation. And what made the politicians, who had once been indifferent to people like Ava, shed tears was that she wasn't asking for sympathy but for change. "A rich person has learned to cry, and a poor person has not screamed," she continued. "We must change, so the poor no longer have to suffer." When Ava finished, a profound silence enveloped the room. Everyone listened, reflecting on what she had just said. Then suddenly, a senator stood up. At first, only a few clapped, but soon the applause spread like a wave throughout the room. Even the coldest politicians could not suppress their emotions. Some people were crying, some were standing and clapping, and the whole room came alive. They didn't just see a young girl. They saw a flame of hope, a voice for the oppressed in society. Finally, the long battle between opposing factions bore fruit. A new tax bill was proposed, one that closed loopholes for big corporations but also expanded healthcare support for the poor. This was an important step, a clear sign that fairness and support for the struggling were being taken seriously. Ava and Victor sat together in a quiet corner of Congress, the light shining on their faces as they looked at each other and smiled. Things were not perfect, but they knew they had done something important. That hug was not just a simple act between two people. It had become a revolution, and they were on the right path. A year had passed since the successful tax reform campaign, and Ava decided to step away from the spotlight. She had grown weary of the constant media attention, endless interviews, and the celebrity-like lifestyle that left no time for herself. Even though she could now enjoy a life of comfort and fame, Ava realized that true happiness didn't come from those things. What she truly desired was peace and the simple life she had always dreamed of, so Ava moved to a small suburban town, far from the noise and media frenzy. There, she opened a little coffee shop called The Hug. The name wasn't just a tribute to the hug that changed her life, it was a symbol of warmth, humanity, and the unity she always believed in. Coffee at The Hug wasn't just a drink, it was a bridge, where strangers met, shared stories, and found comfort in invisible embraces. Ava knew this was the kind of place where she could make small but meaningful differences in her community, a place with no divisions, no social class barriers. The coffee shop soon became a beloved spot. Not only for the locals but also for travelers searching for peace, and for people longing for true human connection. In every cup she brewed, Ava poured in an unspoken message: a hug can change the world. As for Victor, after fulfilling his role in the campaign and supporting Ava and political leaders in passing critical reforms, he stepped down from his position as CEO of the Langston Corporation. Running a vast empire no longer held the same meaning for him. Instead, he felt called to share his story and spread messages of justice, fairness, and the values he had discovered through his personal transformation. Victor began a new journey, traveling across the United States, speaking at schools, churches, and libraries. These weren't grand speeches, but intimate, heart-to-heart conversations with communities. He shared his struggles, the difficult choices he had made, and the lessons learned from his mistakes. He wanted to inspire the younger generation to see that true wealth wasn't about money, it was about the change we bring to the world. Victor's story, that of a billionaire transformed by hardship and self-awareness, not only helped him rediscover his life's purpose but also spread powerful human values to communities. Though no longer at the helm of a powerful corporation, those small gatherings gave him a deeper sense of meaning than he'd ever known. One afternoon, under a warm, orange sunset, Ava stood outside her coffee shop, sipping her usual cup of coffee. She gazed out at the wide, golden fields that stretched beyond the suburbs. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, walking toward her. It was Victor, the man she had met during that protest the year before. The man who had changed her life and restored her faith in justice. Victor was no longer the weary, sorrowful man she once knew. He walked toward her in simple clothes, yet carried a quiet strength and confidence. When their eyes met, he smiled, and in that smile was a lightness she had never seen before. They stood across from each other, saying nothing, but their eyes and smiles said everything. No crowds, no reporters, just them, standing together in the calm of a rural afternoon. They didn't need many words. Their shared journey had already spoken volumes. This was a moment of peace, a chance to reclaim what was lost and to finally feel the serenity they had long yearned for. After a brief silence, Victor softly broke the moment. "You didn't just change me, Ava. You redefined what wealth means to me." His words startled her. She had never imagined she could have such an impact on someone like Victor. She wasn't someone who changed empires, just a regular person who gave a meaningful hug. But that hug, as Victor said, had awakened in him a new awareness, that wealth wasn't about money or power, it was about humanity, about the small acts that could change a life. Victor didn't just speak of what Ava had done for him. He confessed that for much of his life, he had been consumed with career and material gain, forgetting the true values of living. And Ava, with one simple gesture, had reminded him that true wealth lies not in what we own, but in what we give. Hearing his words, Ava felt her heart swell. She walked over and embraced him. But this time, the hug wasn't to comfort or console, it was to say thank you. Thank you for helping her realize that true change starts from within. Thank you for giving her the chance to inspire others. And thank you for not giving up. Her hug was a quiet, but deeply heartfelt expression of gratitude. Victor felt the sincerity in that embrace. He didn't speak. He simply received it, with a peace he had never known before. It was a hug between two people who had once walked very different paths, but now stood united, embracing the values that truly mattered. The skies above Washington that day were unusually blue, as if signaling the start of a new chapter, not just for Ava and Victor, but for society as a whole. They stood together in the field, not as protesters, not as public figures, but as two human beings who had found peace within themselves. The sunlight poured over them, affirming what they now knew: every movement, every great change, could begin with something as simple and sincere as a hug. That hug wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a new journey. A journey that Ava and Victor would now walk together. Not just for themselves, but for all who needed help, justice, and love. The story of Ava and Victor is a deeply emotional journey, from hardship and division to profound transformation sparked by a single hug. In a world where we sometimes forget the value of compassion and connection, their story reminds us that the smallest acts can create the greatest shifts. Ava and Victor didn't just change themselves, they ignited hope for anyone seeking change in society. Their lessons of justice, kindness, and generosity are messages we can carry with us every day. In the end, when we look back at Ava and Victor's path, we realize that every story, every small act, has the potential to ripple outward in unimaginable ways. The strangers we meet, the chance encounters, they can become life-changing moments. Ava isn't just a symbol of compassion, she's a reminder of the power of persistence and unconditional love. Victor, once a powerful and wealthy leader, found the true meaning of wealth, not in his assets, but in what he could give to the world, and in every hug, not just a gesture of warmth, but a reminder that change begins with us. A hug can change a person. And when we pass it on, we can create a better world. A world where love, justice, and fairness are not just words, but actions. This story of Ava and Victor is not just a reminder of the core values of life, but a call to action. If stories like this touch your heart, keep following and sharing them. To spread messages of kindness, justice, and change, we need everyone. Let's build a world full of love and understanding, where every hug has the power to change a life. Follow Gentle Heart Stories so you don't miss any of our uplifting stories that aim to inspire and connect. And if this story moved you, share it with your friends and loved ones, because together, we can change the world, starting from the smallest acts of kindness. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, change begins with you.